Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to a special meeting of the Glendale City Council on May 10th. Roll call, please.
Council members: Friedman,
Here.
Garpetian,
Here.
Najarian, here. Sinanian,
Here.
Mayor Devine.
Here. Your report, please.
Sure. The agenda for the May 10, 2016 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on Friday, May 5, 2016 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
And the first item.
Director of Finance regarding Budget Study Session 2, Fiscal Year 2016-17 Council Priorities, Summary of Appropriations, Capital Improvement Programs, and Proposed Citywide Fee Schedule Changes. This is a presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, ma'am. This is our second budget study session. So again, the idea here is to provide the council and the public with as much information as we can heading into the budget hearing that is scheduled for the 24th. So certainly ask all the questions you want, but understand that the hearing where all that information will come back to you will be on the 24th, and the budget adoption where you would actually approve the budget would be on June the 14th. So this is as much a workshop as anything else. What we want to cover in today's session is the summary of appropriations, the CIP, Capital Improvement Program, and then a discussion, an overview, if you will, of the large binder that you all have regarding the citywide fee schedule. So with that, we'll jump right in. What you see here in terms of the summary of appropriations for all of our funds. Now, we spend most of our time talking about the general fund that you see there along the top, and there is an increase there, and that's good news. But to be clear, the 6.6% increase is a little bit deceiving because it reflects some minor restoration in program activity, especially in the One Glendale after-school sports program and the increase in spending in street resurfacing. But a large chunk of this increase is also reflected in the movement of the code enforcement program out of CDBG back to the general fund, and then the collapsing of the economic development fund into the general fund. You recall last week we talked about we had set up the Economic Development Fund separate and apart from general fund, but unfortunately it just does not meet the criteria as a special revenue fund. And so we are closing that down, pushing it all into the general fund, which ends up increasing the appearance of this percentage increase year over year. What you'll also see in the coming slides is a movement to centralize all of our building maintenance activities. So a big chunk of this increase in the general fund is also the centralization and cost allocation of building maintenance. As you look down the line, nothing really remarkable jumps out except for capital improvement programming. This reflects the $16 million detailed later on in this presentation that is part of the City Council strategic view of the use of development impact fees for new park spaces. This is a chart that should be familiar to you. It documents the 21% reduction in staffing over the last 10 years. You see that our high point in 05-06, we were at 1,995 budgeted authorized positions. This year we will be at 1,579. By itself, that doesn't signify too much to you until you look at this slide here. And I apologize that it is a little bit busy, but Bob, if you help me by moving the cursor around, there at the total pay or the total salaries. Now, that's a little bit deceiving because the 164,926 is all compensation. That's our hourlies, that's overtime, as well as just the regular salaries earned by that 1,772 actual filled positions that were in place in 07-08. So the previous councils had authorized 1,986 positions. We had 1,772 actually filled. We spent $164 million, almost $165 million on total total salaries for all of those employees, full-time equivalent, full-time as well as hourly, all forms of pay. What I want to take your attention to is all the way on the right-hand side of that table. As you look at the 16-17, you see that we have the 1,579 positions, 1,436 is what we have filled. But the key is the 164,212. The actual cost, the salaries paid to those employees and hourlies is less than what it was in 07-08. And so in term,
But that's with 400 less employees, right?
that's with 400 less employees, actually 200 less employees, because that's actual to budgeted, 1772 to 1579. And again, it's all in. Where you say that the takeaway, I think, is on the PERS line, because you see what that cost is. It's 20.8 million, all the way over to 37. So marginal new dollars being generated are going towards shoring up that cost. But in terms of what you're paying to those employees, for relatively fewer people, but again, over a 10-year time frame, that's an average of 1% increase in payroll, far outstripped by CPI. That is, I think, important in terms of telling the story that the City Council has kept fiscal responsibility, that which is in your control, kept it within check. The PERS cost is something that we don't have a whole lot of control over, but you can control the number of employees that you have. You've done that, and in order to meet the overall bottom line number, you've been able to demonstrate that restraint as you cut the organization and not allowed it to grow back to previous size.
Mr. Choi, if I... Sure, may I?
Yeah, I want to understand, with 1,772 employees, it was 164 million. With 1,436, it is still 164 million. The difference that I see is between the PERS net cost,
Yes.
which is 20 million and 37. What is that 37 million going to? This is
That's PERS.
That's actually the check that you send to PERS. So PERS has today on deposit $1.2 billion for Glendale.
so you invested $17 million more into PERS, basically.
You're having to do that, yes.
So
That's where that increased cost is going. I would just make one minor correction there, though, sir. On the left-hand side, we are going actual, 1772, to actual, 164,926. On the right-hand side, you're going budgeted position, 1579, because we don't know how many will fill in the course of a year, to the budget. So you're going budget to budget.
okay, so if you go a year before,
Then it's actual to
15,
actual.
it's actual number. So
Yes, sir.
1575, number of employees, 1575, it was $155 million.
That's right.
So it's about $9 million less with 300, almost 300 employees, less employees.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Doing what I would submit to you based on your key performance indicators and your strategic goal attainment, doing effectively the same amount of work.
Does that mean that we were so inefficient before?
I don't know that we were inefficient before as much as we were institutionalized to the way that we had always done things. And
Which was inefficiently?
to the extent that absent crisis, absent the need to cut, people oftentimes will find where they're comfortable. I think you can be extraordinarily pleased and proud of the employees that you have, that they have stretched the limits of what can be done with the size of a team as we have.
We also have outsourced some things.
We have outsourced, we've used technology much better, and with the council's permission, we've revised some of the processes that we use to do some of the work. But I would submit to you that the silver lining of economic crisis is that you don't know quite what you're capable of until you have to actually exercise that degree of resourcefulness. And I think you see that in Glendale perhaps more than any other city in Los Angeles County, and perhaps even the state.
Okay. And a question about this, again, going back to PERS, of course. The projected or proposed budget 1617, PERS is $42,863,000. That's, what is it, like
I'm sorry, say that again, sir?
The projected...
Gross PERS.
Yeah, gross PERS is 42,863. That's 15% more than what it was 9 years ago.
Yes, sir.
And it's, I don't think it comes as a surprise to any of us. We know this, it was escalating. Is there coming a point where these year-on-year increases are not so drastic and we see it leveling off and this number's not going to be this scary anymore?
Absolutely. That's why we project out all of our long-term costs over the 5 and 7 year projection. So you can begin to see that by fiscal year 22, 23, you do see the leveling off and a more gradual increase until, honestly, the attrition of the existing retiree base kicks in and you start to see a rather steep decline in what our overall PERS costs will be, such that on the 15 and even 20-year projections, these PERS costs start to come down with effectively, in terms of the model, at the same rate at which they were increasing. The point being that in actuarial terms, all of this is cyclical. And it does bear repeating that City Council got to a point of pension reform long before the state of California ever did. But to the extent that California now has caught up as well, you know what the end result with PERS is going to be, because the benefits as part of PEPRA, the third tier, you have a first, a second, and now a third tier. The benefits of that third tier are very similar to what the benefits were before the craziness of the early 1990s in the dot-com bubble, when PERS promised that you could increase the benefit without ever paying the cost. So now you will have a situation where you'll return to a situation where those benefits were sustainable for generations and probably will continue to be. The trick is to get to that point, which means managing all of these numbers so you can get there and at the same time not sacrifice service levels to the community. And I think that's what you see in this budget. So it's, these are the hard numbers, and, we always tell our folks, to kind of run to the contact, don't be afraid of what the data is, because ultimately I think the data reflects well on that which you've been able to do. When you look at our different general fund appropriations, again, key term here is general fund appropriations. The $182 million chunk that we have, or 194 this coming fiscal year, 182 in the current fiscal year. You see that the increase in city attorney is a reflection of moving some of the code enforcement work back into the general fund, increase in internal service fund charges, and again, you'll see the common theme of building maintenance, and you'll see on the subsequent slide there in Public Works a 21% reduction. That's basically offset by the increases in all the other general fund budgets, because whereas before Public Works would carry all of that cost, now we're pushing all of that cost to the departments, and they can own that cost, manage that cost as separate business units. But again, basically what you're seeing here is increases in basic expense, the internal service funds. In the case of community development, 51% increase. Don't let it fool you. That's the return of code enforcement and the placement of economic development back into that department, as opposed to being a separate fund unto itself. And in fire department, you saw last week when we went through what some of the program restoration was, not only was it in community services and parks and in Public Works, the outfitting of new fire equipment and apparatus is reflected here as well. But generally speaking, everything else is building maintenance related. The retirement incentive for the general fund portion, this is the last year that you'll see this. So when you look back at these years in calendar year 2012, that significant reduction from 1873 to 1605 positions, we basically had an incentive to drop positions. And we financed that over a period of 3 years. This will be the last year, or 4 years rather, this will be the last year that you see it. The non-departmental is a reflection of OPEB. When you look to the other funds, that was general fund. These are all the other special revenue funds and enterprise funds that we'll talk about now. You see that a reduction there in the urban art fund. That is solely a reflection of the programming that will be done. It doesn't have anything to do with their fund balance, which I think is still above $4.3 million. So that money is there, and that will be used by community or by library arts and culture for various programs ongoing. But you see the impact of Measure N being felt here, where there's a lot of tentativeness in terms of what programs we begin and how we use those funds. But it isn't as though we aren't putting money into art programs or culture programming. It's just a function of what you see, what is being done this year as opposed to what's available to you. Yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions, if I may. If you want to finish, or
As you guys would like.
Slides 7 and 8. One of the major departments that would have a reduction is Public Works, 21%.
Correct.
What does that mean?
That means that whereas before all of the building maintenance functions for all of our operations were housed in Public Works, now we're shotgunning all of that cost to the respective departments. So departments that have lots of facilities like community services and parks will see an increase, but that's basically being offset by the decrease of money that's going to Public Works.
So the increase in fire, which is 8.5%, and the police that is 3.5%, is that the,
A portion of that as well as building maintenance.
and these increases are not perishable? The building maintenance portions, they are not perishable?
It's just moving.
Just moving costs.
Moving costs. I just want to make sure, because when you look at it on the face value, it just tells you there's 8.5% increase from 45 million to 48 million.
Correct.
Then you would think that that includes salaries.
That's their maintenance costs for the various fire stations, as well as the cost to outfit the new fire engine that's coming in, as well as protective personal equipment that we have to replace. So it's all of those things, not necessarily staffing.
And the community development that has 51% increase.
So that's the code enforcement people coming back, as well as all of the economic development activity coming back, as well as their internal service charges for technology in particular, as well as building maintenance.
And the code enforcement funds were taken from CDBG? I mean,
Yes.
we're supplementing.
So you were going to free up those CDBG dollars, capital CDBG dollars, and taking that cost onto the general fund.
So where is this money coming from? to
This money is
replace-
coming from, this is program
General fund.
restoration.
Oh, I know, but
Yeah.
where is it coming from? Where is it materializing?
It's coming from increased revenue through sales tax and property tax by way of the slow but steady recovery in the economy.
Okay.
This is the $230,000 that we took out from CDBG.
That portion of it, yes.
Well, the money that we're putting back into CD.
Yeah,
Right, we
you're
put it
gonna
back
allow-
into,
that's right.
instead of paying for code enforcement,
Right, in
we're
South
paying it
Glendale.
through general fund. Okay.
So again, general fund, what we are going to be proposing to you for 16-17 is almost $195 million, but again, that's a little bit deceiving just by way of the way that we're moving money from one department to another, collapsing other outside budgets into the general fund budget. It's very limited in terms of program restoration. When you look at all the other funds, the special revenue funds, as I mentioned, the Urban Art Fund is probably the one that sticks out. CDBG, housing assistance, home grants, supportive housing, all those that you see in the 200 series, the low 200s, are all functions of what we get from the federal government. So you don't have a whole lot of discretion there. You saw for the first time in a long time, CDBG is getting a little bit more money back. The Housing Assistance Fund is getting some more money back, but that doesn't mean we'll increase the number of vouchers we have for Section 8, just that we have more money to actually make the rent obligations that are incumbent upon the existing vouchers. So not a whole lot of move there. We talked last time about Fund 213, Low Mod Income Housing Asset Fund. That's formula driven by way of the dissolution of redevelopment and does not reflect at all the monies that will be deposited into the low mod income housing fund for us to do at least several more projects upcoming in the next year and a half, 2 years. As I mentioned, Economic Development Fund, that is basically being collapsed and being put into the general fund. You'll see the funds 254, 256, 257 are all, and 258 are all related to transit. That's our Beeline operation, about $9.5 million a year for operations, and also the assembly of funding to do the $18 million Beeline facility. As that is nearing the design phase, it's ending the design phase, and we'll approach the construction phase upcoming.
So, I'm sorry.
That's right.
All these transit funds, Prop A and Prop C, is this where we pay for dial-a-ride programs?
Dial-a-ride funding, I believe, is Prop A.
Prop A. And the Prop C, what does it pay for?
That's for transit as well, but we have a little more latitude there as to what we spend that money on. At this point, that money primarily goes towards the Beeline operation, as well as stockpiling the money that we need to do the Beeline facility as we end the design development phase of that project.
And the 258, item 2, transit utility fund? That's
Same thing. Those four funds all work in concert together in terms of the operations as well as the capital investment that you'll see in the coming year.
Okay. All right, thanks.
On the police grant funds, you see a significant reduction percentage-wise. That's a reflection of the CalMet grant going away, the real estate grant going away. The chief is hopeful that we will see new legislation that will reauthorize those grant funds, and then we will take the officers assigned to those grant activities, those detectives by and large, and move them back out to these special grant funds. But for now, because those grants are going away legislatively, then that cost has to come back to the general fund.
Is any of that AB 109 money?
That will be, I believe that's coming straight back to the general, yeah, so general fund, yeah. Fire mutual aid, that's just a function of the degree of mutual aid activities that we have sent our fire crews on and the reimbursement that we get. You don't think of it, at least I certainly didn't, as we were going through these projections for the current year, just how many strike teams that we had sent people on. The first part of the year was absolutely exhaustive in terms of the amount of activity we had. We were sending people out on mutual aid, and you see that reflected there. In terms of special event activities, a lot of this is reimbursement for filming, overtime related to filming, especially in Burbank. We cover them on some of the needs of their police activity for filming, but it's all done at a fee. We get that cost back. The library fund, this is M&O. They have a nice endowment. This will go to buy books. This will go to pay for programming within the libraries. The electric benefit charge is a function of rate increases. That's why that amount goes up. As you see the rates increase and the activity increasing, then you'll see the amount that we provide back by way of senior and indigent customer subsidy. The recreation fund, while that amount is coming down, that's not a reflection of less money going into that fund, but rather we had budgeted some rather large projects in the previous year. We aren't budgeting that amount in the coming year, so don't let that fool you. That's just a reflection of one year versus another year by way of the projects that are there housed in that budget. When you look at EMS, the EMF funds, it's a function of the internal service charges that are being allocated to that fund. And then in the parking fund, you see that we are wrapping up and winding down the parking modernization. So it's a decrease of 13.5. Again, not a decrease necessarily in the activity of that fund, but it's a project that we budgeted for last year that you're not seeing this year. Yes, sir.
A couple of quick questions. The police special grant fund and supplemental law enforcement funds. These are grants that we receive, right?
Yes.
And that would get added up to the $72 million police budget.
What you will see in this current year, those are they're part of the total amount of the police budget. 60 million in the general fund, 70 plus in the total city budget.
So this is already included in that.
That's already included. The reduction from 934 last year, rather current year, to 363, 528 in the coming year, that's already included.
Okay, and the EMF fund, where does this money go?
That is a fund that exists as part of the fire department.
That charges for the ambulances. Ambulance.
So this is part of the fire department's budget?
Yes.
Okay. And it's included in that 40?
No,
That's not included in there?
this is
So
standalone budget.
This is standalone budget? Okay.
It's under the fire department umbrella, but this budget, we account for it separately.
Quick question about how does the fire mutual aid fund function? Is this amount, 199, almost $200,000 is sort of money that we set aside to fund whatever expenses are associated with sending our cops out?
It's done on a
fire.
reimbursement basis.
Okay.
So we'll send a strike team out, and then that time is logged, and then at the conclusion of the year, we get reimbursed, or maybe even periodically reimbursed by, I think it's Cal OES.
Right.
And that's, we have to go if we want folks to come to our aid.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. No, I get
So
that.
we book the cost there to match the revenue. And that's just the estimate based off prior year's experience.
So this is the amount that,
Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to spend it, that's just an estimate of.
Based on what we think happening this
think it
current
will
year,
be
yeah,
this year.
we see it being this level.
okay, but this money comes back to us.
Yes,
Correct.
it's offset. The police project, you'll see this next week as we transition to a more long-term conventional type of debt structure. The COPs for the existing police facility represent really the only debt on the general fund that exists, $38 million for the police headquarters building, not to be confused with the bond indebtedness that exists for GWP. But that amount of money is there. It's the amount that we pay. I want to say, actually, with this one, Bob, we go down to what? What would be the indebtedness after we make this payment?
35.6, I think, is what
$35 million?
principal will be after our next payment.
When you look at capital improvement funds, not to be confused with the general fund or special revenue funds, this is an area that the council has spent a tremendous amount of time on. In 401, that is the general fund's capital improvement fund. And then you see how we're looking to spend about $6.7 million over the 4 line departments, as well as the $2 million that we will put into the Shoal Canyon landfill closure fund, as we're obligated to do. The gas tax funds, you'll see in a second, have to do with the maintenance of roadways. And that is a challenge for us because that is a fixed amount per number of X cents per gallon, as opposed to a percent of the cost of a gallon of gas. And so you're seeing that that fund get outpaced across the country as a source of resurfacing roads and maintaining roadways. The park mitigation fees, there's the $16 million that the City Council had put forth as part of your strategic plan. And then the library mitigation fee, this is the amount of money, that $555,000 that you're looking at by way of all of the public furnishings for the renovated Central Library. In terms of our enterprise funds, these are the standalone funds that act as effectively business units within the various departments. So they're in the sewer fund. We're proposing a $30.5 million budget for the coming year. About a third of that is capital. The other 2/3 is operations, all of our crews that work on maintaining the sewer lines. By contrast, the refuse disposal fund is our trash operation. About 92% of that cost is operations and about 8% is capital.
Scott?
Yes.
What do we, where would stormwater sort of increase EPA regulations causing, compliance, causing us to have to spend a lot of money, on those regulations? Would that be in sewer, or is that somewhere else in here, or is it not in here at all?
It's just captured in the Department of Public Works. That's a great question because we do have to comply with National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, NPDES, but there is no funding source for it.
And what do we anticipate our cost to be in, let's say,
Full
5
compliance
years?
with EPA?
Well, let's just say 5 years.
Could be $60 million.
So do we have that budgeted
No,
anywhere?
you have it budgeted nowhere.
So should we discuss that at some point?
Ideally, we would. Ideally, what you'll see is that the County of Los Angeles intends to put in place, because this is a regional issue.
Right. I thought we already put into place kind of a county
And it
permit,
failed.
so we should.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they, that did not move forward. I do think that the county flood control district perhaps is the best vehicle, the best avenue for us to do a parcel tax.
No, I know that the parcel tax
Yeah.
failed, but there's a permit that was passed, so we must have some idea.
Well, we know
So are we just going to wait for another revenue source?
no, we
before
do
budget
our
for
work
it?
right now in terms of cleaning storm drains, in
No,
terms
I
of
know
street
that.
sweeping.
But in terms of budgeting, are we going to hope
Yeah.
that, are we going to set up a fund for it and start putting money into it, or are we just going to hope that there's a solution on the horizon?
I'm going to pragmatically hope that the county will step forward, and if they don't within the coming 2 years, 18 months, then we would probably go it on our own and put something to Glendale voters as to whether or not they would support a parcel tax.
So just something to keep in mind, so possibly a $60 million obligation.
Is that over 5 years, did you say, or is it
No,
all in one?
if you
all at once?
complied, the hard part is if you go by the standard that the environmental community, third-party litigants want us to achieve, they want the water coming out of the pipe at the ocean to be at an absolute zero in terms of toxic elements. Well, that is extraordinarily difficult to adhere to. So right now, as part of our MPDES permit, Rubik will tell you that we are complying with the trash total maximum daily load, the TMDL, in terms of keeping trash out of the storm drains. We are now working on, I believe metal is in place. Is that right, Rubik? And the next one is bacteria. That starts to get extraordinarily expensive, especially when each city, each of the 88 cities in LA County is kind of doing its own thing. The beauty of the county is that it's able to, because of its relationship with county flood control, to do a much more centralized job. And no one denies that there needs to be a funding source for that. In the past, the county's formula for putting forward a parcel tax had very limited money coming back to cities by way of a local return, and that hurts us because we are still liable for all of the best practices that third-party litigants want to see from a city in terms of compliance to make sure that that water is clean. And so it's difficult because it's a federal mandate. And that cities have been held liable for those who have thumbed their nose at it and said, well, if you're not going to give me money, I'm not going to do anything. You know, Heal the Bay, NRDC, those are very real outfits that have, scared religion into a lot of cities. Now, good news is that, we continue to clean storm drains. We do have street sweeping, but at the same time, let's be honest, a lot of our streets don't lend themselves to street sweeping because of the number of cars on the street. There is, in all likelihood, a better way to do this, and it involves the storm drain system and the flood control system where all those storm drains lead. But that is a difficult situation unto itself. I will tell you here, you see all of our charter mandated funds. These are the funds that you will not find in any other city, I venture a guess, because they have all updated their charter. We, on the other hand, have the Electric Works Revenue Fund, Depreciation Fund, Water Works Revenue Fund, Depreciation Fund. Effectively, the depreciation funds are our capital funds. The Water Works Electrical Fund, you'll see perhaps half of that is our electrical purchases. About another half, or 40% of that, I believe, is our operations, the actual M&O as well as the personnel, and another 8% of that total that you see in that revenue fund, it's a little deceivingly named, is fuel purchases. And then when you look at Waterworks revenue, you see that 64% of that cost, about 2/3 of that cost, is our people and our M&O, actually treating the water, pumping the water, and doing all the things that we need to do to make sure it's safe drinking water for our customers. And about a little over a third of that cost is water purchases from Met. When we look at internal service funds, these are the funds that we use to collect revenue from other line departments to pay for centralized types of services and programs. I will tell you that these are generally fairly static. The compensation insurance fund, however, that $700,000 increase is significant, and we hope to continue the good work of reducing the negative fund balance in the workers' comp fund. It had been $23 million negative, now it's $14 million negative, but I do think that you as City Council, as policymakers, can take heart in the fact that we are focused on that, one, by adjusting our operations, as was mentioned last week in the study session, and if nothing else, by the work that was done on the liability fund, where that liability fund there was $10 million negative in 2009. It now features a fund balance of $14 million. The idea being that you had the diligence and the discipline to put that money away. And that speaks very well to everything that the council wants and expects from the employee groups.
Mr. Ochoa?
Yes, sir.
Quick question before we move any further. On slide 13, number 13, Parks Mitigation Fee Fund, that's $60 million.
Yes, sir.
On page 14, it's telling me, basically, this is what we decided on a few weeks ago as far as the Fremont Park, Central Park, Verdugo Park, all the other programs that we had, Maple Park,
Yes, sir.
Maryland Park. But it doesn't say anything about the projects that we approved as well for let's say, for Riverwalk to be completed.
Correct.
For Duke Mejian to be completed, because there's a misconception out there that the funds were deobligated and the barn is not being finished, which is not true. And we're going to finish the floors and the storefront and the the HVAC and everything else. I want to know where would that reflect in our budget?
I will show you the last piece, that last 500,000 in just a second, but the 2.5 that had previously been appropriated for Duke Majan still resides with that project. We aren't showing it here because it's an old appropriation that's just being carried over. Today, we have about $1 million of that 2.5 actually obligated to work, the HVAC and some of the building systems, as you recall. There remains about $1.5 million that is appropriated for Duke Majan, but not obligated or tied to a contract.
And when would that be either appropriated or obligated? I mean, obligated or basically de-obligated or de-appropriated and moved for something else?
As part of this process, if the council were to tell us de-appropriate the existing 1.5 in Duke Majan and bring that back to the fund balance and just de-appropriate it, then you would see it in a fund summary for Parks Mitigation Fee Fund. That fund balance would be higher by 1.5. If the council didn't tell us to do that, then Mr. Golanian and Mr. Duran would be coming to you in probably the next 6 months or so with the project for, I believe it's the restrooms and nature center for those projects. But as of today, as we sit here right now, the original $2.5 million appropriation still sits with that project.
Okay, so just want to go back to emphasizing the point that the barn is being completed and that $1.5 million that is going to be left in that account, it could be appropriated, obligated for a project on Duke Majan, or can be de-appropriated for something else, if the council decides in the future.
That's a council's choice, sir.
But it's not part of our budget.
No, until you will have.
It's not part of our budget approval.
No, it's not part of that budget because that money has been appropriated, and I have not been instructed to bring back a resolution to de-appropriate it. If you did tell us to de-appropriate it, then we would bring that back to you at some point, presumably as part of this budget or first quarter, mid-year, whatever the case might be. So what you see here is we're going on the same trajectory until council tells us differently. For that money still exists, and you'll see $500,000 in the coming slides that would ostensibly complete the full vision that was originally held for Duke Majan. And unless you tell us don't go that route, then that's kind of what the strategy has been.
And the funds that we appropriated for, obligated for Riverwalk is going through already.
Those monies are that's right.
Good.
Yes,
That's
sir.
why I wanted to make sure that public is aware of the fact that those projects are being done, so.
Yes, sir. What you see here in the medical insurance fund, again, this is the citywide medical insurance fund. We talk about the OPEB, other post-employment benefit action that was taken by the council. This amount would be about $1.3 million higher had you not unblended those rates. And so folks have asked, did the strategy work? And not only did you see in excess of $200 million of liability come off the city's balance sheet, you're seeing it in real terms. Hopefully, we'll continue to see ongoing savings by the unblending, but in this year, as we go forward, and it's a conservative estimate, that this number is about $1.3 million lower than it otherwise would have been.
Scott?
Yes, ma'am.
On that, at some point, I'd like to see, it doesn't have to be, I don't know if the rest of the council wants to, but I'd like to see a report about what's happened with the employees that had the unblending. If they found insurance, if it's suitable, if they have doctors, what the average cost of those, their premiums is now compared to what it used to be. I'd just like to really have an intensive follow-up on that.
Yes, ma'am. We will have that. It's a good timing for it as well. The 294 that you see there, that 17% increase, reflects the OPEB buyout that was done for RHSP. I probably don't quite know what that one is, but that's okay.
They might be working down.
They're testing downstairs? Okay. That's reflected in the RHSP, so the idea is that we're moving away from the OPEB and doing a much more defined contribution style of program by way of RHSP. The medical insurance fund also includes the $800,000 that the council approved as part of the transition subsidy for retirees. So that's also in there as well. Last but not least, on the post-employment benefit fund, the reason why you see that significant decrease is a couple of reasons. One, that is where we housed the funding that we received for the Munis project to move the ERP program, the Enterprise Resource Platform program, as well as you see reflected about $2 million of that is the last payment on the separation incentive that was done as part of dropping all those positions in 12 and in 13. So those are all of our internal service funds. Let's talk about CIP a little bit more, as was mentioned by Mr. Garpetian. CIP is made up of separate capital improvement project funds. You'll see the general fund, you'll see from all the other funds, and we'll give you a little recap both on the front end and on the back end. So hopefully this makes a lot of sense. In terms of the general fund, there was a time that we were okay.
Yeah, we're back on.
All right.
I don't know if they can hear you.
Yeah, I mean,
In 1978, I had an amazing hi-fi. And, no, I'm just kidding.
Ghostbusters.
So are we off air now? or-
No, I think we're back.
on.
We're there. Okay. At one point, we had deposited significant portions of sales tax directly into CIP. That amount began to dwindle by the middle of the early 2000s, down to 14 to 4% for a couple of years. In 10, 11, the hardest years for the city through the Great Recession, nothing was put in. By 12, 13, we had started to climb our way back. So we put in 1% of sales tax, into the CIP fund, the general fund's CIP fund. Now we've increased that to 1.2 to 1.5 for the coming year, and you will see as things improve, as that PERS rate subsides over time, increasingly we will march back towards putting a significant portion into capital replacement.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, about the PERS rate. We're assuming that that rate is going to stabilize and decrease, right? But that's a big assumption, isn't it? I mean, we don't know that for sure.
Right, so we use kind of an order of magnitude.
We know it for a
yeah.
certain amount of time, but we don't know beyond.
The good news, I think, the good news is that PERS board is actually going to, I forget the term, Bob, you'll have to help me. They're reducing the discount. Huh?
Risk mitigation.
Risk mitigation. Over the next 10 years and even more, they will be reducing their expected rate of return. That will drive our rates higher, and that's what you see happening now. To the extent that you see a 10-year return, a 15-year return, they are actually doing fairly well. It's only in the last couple of years that you've seen this dip outside of the Great Recession. So
So it all assumes, though, we don't have another recession in 7 years.
it does, but I think as PERS continues to modify its expected rate of return and lower that, it guards against.
Okay, so you're saying they have new safeguards sort of in the way that they're doing their.
They're lowering
rates?
expectations at the end of the day to give you greater assurance on your
buffer.
rates.
Plus
Right.
risky investments.
And so what you've seen them do is transition out of the investment pools that they had been in. You're going towards something that's a little more stable and a little more predictable, but you don't get the higher end, right? On the different actuarial tables that we look at, there is a 15% above their average and a 15% below their expected rate of return, and we're able to see just how bad it could be and how good it could be. We prefer to stay somewhere in the middle. So I think what you'll see is our numbers. The good news is, I'll tell you this, we got our most recent PERS numbers, and as bad as they were what we were projecting because we are very conservative. And so we continue to be conservative. I think we'll be well served by that. Now, 10 years out, to your specific point, If we wanted to have greater assurance of determining what our rate will be, we may want to establish what's known as a PERS stabilization fund. It's a trust fund set up expressly to smooth out and balance out what your PERS rate is. That does mean cash in the short term up front, but that could be an investment that's well made if indeed you believe that there's still too much volatility in PERS' portfolio. So we'll be bringing that back to you later on this summer. You know, some actuaries would tell you, no, you don't need that because where PERS is going and the correction that they've already made, they are well on their way to getting you to a point that is very stable, or at least more stable. But if you want to go belt and suspenders, then you would set up such a fund. So we'll give you the pros and cons of that in the coming months. Here you see, this is the way our CIP fund works. The money that's coming in for the coming year. We pull about $4 million out of the Shoal Canyon tipping fee. So out of that $48.99 per ton that it costs to tip at Shoal, the vast majority of that is used for the actual operations of the landfill. But $9.8 million is a host fee. That comes back to us. So of that $4 million that we pull from Shoal, the $582,000 is that sales tax that I just showed you on the previous slide that we, right off the top, that will be 1.5 points in the coming fiscal year that we push into the CIP fund. This year, as I mentioned, some limited program restoration. We're taking $1 million of general fund money and putting that into street resurfacing so that we can maintain our pavement index at a level that is agreeable to the city council and the community. Now, in the projected appropriations, we have a budget of $4.8 million that I'll go through in just a second, and we back right out $2 million to the landfill. So it isn't $6 million that comes from the landfill operation, it's effectively $2. $4 million comes in, $2 million gets pushed back into the landfill closure fund. We do have some reprogrammed appropriations. These are projects that were previously approved that we are closing out. And you'll see how that plays in a couple of cases, but these are generally projects that are completed, and we're just cleaning up the fund, closing out the project, and throwing the amount of money back into the fund balance. So from that standpoint, for the coming year, we're looking at $1.5 million surplus. Now, when you blend that with all the projects that you're going to hear about in just a second, you see the net result available balance ending at $882 negative. I would actually submit to you that that's good because previously it had been $2.35 million negative. So the point being is that you're getting closer to a pay-as-you-go by putting money into CIP, and truly you're not going to spend, as you just saw in the de-appropriation of about $2.7 million, or the cleanup of old projects that we close out, that you don't spend all of your CIP money in a given year. So this is no real cause for concern. But the idea being that you're getting to a point where you will end up with available fund balance positive year over year. That's where we want to be. That's the goal heading forward in the coming year. What are those projects in the CIP 401, that $4.7 million? Some reconstruction money for fire station number 26, the headquarters building. And you'll see that overall this project will probably be about $238,000. Some of these projects get appropriated over a couple of years, just based on the flow of work and the capacity of the staff to do the work. And so we'll fund it over a 2-year time frame. Other projects, like you see Signal Power Backup System or ADA facility modification, those are ongoing projects that we'll always put a little bit of money into to continue doing ADA curb alignments and ramps and all the other stuff that we need to do. Part of that $2.7 million de-appropriation was taking funds that had accumulated, surplus funds that had accumulated in capital accounts, and knocking them down to reflect that which could actually be done in the course of a year. So again, you're cleaning up the CIP funds, you're closing out some of the CIP funds, and we're channeling it into other projects. Yes, ma'am.
Question, do we have a PAYGO target?
Ideally, you'll see us get back to 10%, maybe even 15% of sales tax coming right off the bat, and that money just goes into CIP for you to decide how you want to spend.
So do we have a PAYGO percentage target?
My target would be 10% of sales tax, would be about $3 million off the top.
No, but I mean,
going in.
of your CIP budget,
Yeah.
do you have is it you want to have 20% pay-go? Do you want to have 30% pay-go? Do you think of it that way?
On the general fund budget, no, because that cover, unlike our enterprise funds where we know we have depreciation and obligations that are
What is it
ongoing.
in the enterprise funds, do we have a pay-go target there?
Well, you're doing probably about a third of your budget in terms of capital investment.
Right, but I mean, we don't have a set policy. It's not on our charter.
Not on
we
the
haven't
general fund.
adopted.
Not on the general fund.
I was just
Yeah,
curious.
because you'll have,
Is there a best practices?
it really depends on what you want. So I would say, no, more is better, to the extent you can.
Yeah.
There was a time when Glendale, when you were putting 50% of your sales tax into the general fund CIP, that was an ideal practice. You're putting, $10 million a year, and you would build projects cash. You wouldn't, any number of projects that were done in the 1990s and before were a function of being able to put that much money away. And so it was kind of the council and the community's heart's content, what do you want to go invest that money in?
Okay, thanks.
So you see some projects, the bane of my personal existence is illuminated street sign replacement, $600,000 in the coming year, another $700,000 in the year afterwards. And so at Brand and Glen Oaks, Mr. Golanian has assured me that will be the first one to get replaced. $1.3 million for street improvements that we talked about already. So we're putting $1 million in from the general fund, and the appropriation will be for 1.3. This is interesting. Rock Haven rehabilitation. We're going to continue putting the $50,000 to do the base level of maintenance of that facility ongoing. But I think it's worth noting that the year life of the project year to date has been about almost $1 million, from doing some work on the roofs to just doing some of the grounds and maintaining that. So if the city had put in $8.25 million in terms of the acquisition, you put in about another $1 million just holding on to that asset for this period of time, hence the discussion about what to do on a going forward basis.
And one question on that regard, what was the estimated cost of renovating the whole thing
On which one?
on Rock Haven?
On Rock Haven, the numbers that we're using
Again?
right now are about $300 a foot. That's on the low end for a historic restoration. For 16,000 square feet, you could, I think right now at this point with the SHPO designation, they say it doesn't cost you any more, but I do think that it would be somewhere north of $300 a foot to do that renovation.
Okay, thanks.
Then you look at other projects that exist, the Glorietta Lighting and Irrigation, Dugmasian Nature Center. To Mr. Garpetian's point, deobligating $500,000 from the Verdugo Park existing appropriation, and then moving $500,000 non-DIF money into that account, basically to backfill it, is represented there.
And this is not including that $1.5 million?
Not including that,
So
sir.
that would be $2 million.
Yes. That would be,
On top
if you
of
were
that,
to approve
800.
this, yes.
On top of that $840,000 that you already appropriated to finish the barn.
That's correct, sir.
So 800 plus 2 million, $2.8 million.
That would be...
1.5 plus 500 is 2 million.
Plus the existing, that other appropriation, I think it's an $800,000 contract plus another $150,000. So about $1 million of that original 2.5 is spoken for, tied up in a contract. So all in, $3 million, count it. Right? 2.5 plus 5.
5, okay.
And you see central library renovation. This is branch libraries. They're just the repairs and upgrades that we do at our various branches. The central library, this is for staff furniture, desks, things like that, that will go along with the new renovated library, not the public seating that was that other amount that I showed you, the $550,000. That'll be the stuff that matches the architectural style and detailing. It's probably worth noting the overall project for the library is about $19.6 million from a $14.5 million construction, 1.4 in FF&E, design, soft costs, and then of course the contingency. But that gets you to your
19 million?
all in. It's about 14.5 construction, 1.4 million contingency, 1.4 FF&E, 1.5 design, soft cost of $850,000.
So how much of it was a Measure R money? I know that we lent about $5 million.
No,
for it to
those
come back to us?
bond monies. So until we had fronted money, knowing that in the 2011 bond or 2010 bond, there was going to be several $1 million that was designated to be used for the library project. Until and unless that money flowed to the city, you were going to take general fund, undesignated fund balance, and then backfill that with the bond monies once those monies were available. And that has happened now.
And how much is that, $5 million?
I want to say it was 5.5, because I want to say it's $8.5 million that was coming from CIP.
So it's backfilled already?
I
That
believe so,
5.5?
because we were able to do the 2010 bonds. We're waiting on the 2011 bonds that were sold at the end of redevelopment's lifespan. So that money has been released to us, the 2010 bonds.
Thank you.
A question,
Yes, sir.
Madam Mayor. Is there some misinformation out there about our budgeting for Duke-Majan Educational Center?
I don't know that there is misinformation as much as concern. That information, that as Mr. Garpetian had referenced, there was a $2.5 million appropriation. Not all of that has been tied to a contract. Council did have discussions as to what your discretion was in de-appropriating DIF funds, because that 2.5 is DIF funds, and would that be pulled back? And I think that's the angst that was existing in the community.
Didn't we discuss a swap, though? Swapping?
Or $500,000 that you saw
It's over here, the $500,000.
right there. That's separate. And this is, originally, you'll recall that the folks in CSP were going to be asking for another $500,000 in DIF monies. Council said no. Those DIF monies going forward, and even some discretion, the discussion went on for a bit about whether or not any additional DIF monies would go to Duke-Majan. So there is that 2.5 that had been appropriated just a couple of years ago. About $1 million of that's been, or at least has been obligated to a contract, no backing away from it. 1.5 of that original 2.5 million still exists that you have authority over, and to reflect the council's policy that DIF monies would not, future DIF monies would not go to that, to the park. What staff was saying is we're spending money in Verdugo Park already. Let's take $500,000 from that appropriation, so that way it's CIP money, put that at Duke-Majan, and you would backfill the work at Duke-Majan, or backfill the work at Verdugo Park with DIF. That is a lot of motion. That's a lot of movement. I think that's what causes a great deal of concern.
But this 500,000 is to go full circle and complete Duke-Majan. The project
The
is
original vision that was originally espoused.
That's not 500, it's 2 million. Let's
Well,
get the
but
numbers
no,
straight.
but this
Because
additional
it's not 500, it's $2 million. It's not 500,000.
That's $500,000 of
On
new
top of
money.
1.5 million,
Correct.
right? So total is $2 million to, I mean, the barn is going to be, we're finishing the barn. The project is being finished. I mean, floors are going to be done, the windows are going to be done, the AC is going to be done. But this $2 million is for future nature programs or a bathroom, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't seen the whole thing yet, but it's not 500,000. And it's a DIF money, because it doesn't matter if you take DIF and put it in Verdugo and move from Verdugo to there, but it's basically the same thing.
Ultimately-
It's the same.
Ultimately, it's the council's discretion as to whether or not you put any more money, whether it's DIF or non-DIF,
Right.
in Duke-Majan Park.
I understand.
There's $1.5 million sitting there in an appropriation. What this reflects is another $500,000. That would complete the original vision for Duke-Majan. You have the authority to decide, does that go or does that not go? I think what you're hearing from community members today, not just today, but in the last week or so, is we want to see the original vision brought to fruition. That is ultimately your call.
Yeah, but I hear about rest of the community, something else as well. So that's why we're trying to keep the balance between completing the barn and, but that's not the, I don't think that's a discussion for today, but.
Not on this
If
part.
it is, let's discuss it. If it's not.
Well,
let's
I
move
mean,
forward.
if you did not want to pursue that line of, if you did not want to pursue that strategy, then my guess is you are not going to want to approve $500,000 here, right? You would not want to put that 500,000, because 500,000 in the context of that overall original vision doesn't get you where you want to go. What the project
$2
manager,
million. It's not, $2 million will get you there.
$2 million will get you there.
Right, 500,000.
500,000 will not.
So we're not talking about only for 500,000, we're talking about the $2 million. And
But my point to you is that if you didn't want to go there at all, you're not going to approve $500,000 because that won't do the project. You know, if you did not approve this, you're probably going to come back and de-appropriate the 1.5 that's sitting there from the original appropriation. Yeah.
It's existing.
Okay, this is the $16 million. This is what council had worked on. Fremont Park, you saw that last year we put aside, we socked away 2.1. Then most of that money still remains, 2.113 versus 2.15. We're asking for another $2 million. That will jumpstart the work at Fremont Park and get us almost halfway through that improvement, that park improvement. Again, a little bit tricky here because that park cannot be done entirely with DIF monies because DIF monies can only be for new improvements, not just rehabbing existing improvements. And so Jess and his team will continue to scour grant funds to complete the rest of that work and or come back to you in the coming year with additional CIP requests. The big takeaways here, you see the $5 million at Wilson, the $3.45 million at Columbus. We are meeting now with our counterparts at the GUSD to dust off the environmental documents for Columbus and get that project up and running. We believe that that can happen in relatively short order and that Wilson will be right on the heels of that.
So are we talking about then, let's see, $8 million for 2 soccer fields?
8.45 for the 2 soccer fields. One note here, just to kind of full disclosure, is you see Maple Shade Park structure and I think Maryland as well. We may be coming back to you before July 1 to appropriate those projects as part of the current fiscal year to accelerate those projects going forward as opposed to waiting for the coming fiscal year. So still doing it.
My understanding was the Shade project was going to be, we've been talking about this for the last 6 months. Not expedited, but being on a timely manner, if you will.
Right.
But
So we would appropriate it. The RFP, the documents are going upcoming to council, so we would just tie the appropriation to the letting of that work, the design build contract that we want to go out on the street to. I'm just telling you that we may end up pulling those 2 line items off of this slide because they'll happen in the current fiscal year as opposed to the coming fiscal year. All right. Then you see the $555,000 we talked about for all the FF&E furnishings and the new library. The citywide pedestrian plan and the citywide education initiative, these are funds that exist in the community development portion of the CIP. The Beeline facility, we talked a little bit about that. We're putting money away for that ultimate $18 million project, and you see that we have the different funding sources for that. Then, as you move into public works, they have a good deal of funding through CIP, and a lot of it is ongoing. Again, although it's money that we would like to see expanded either through a Measure R2 or some type of reconfiguration of gas tax funds. But these are accounts that basically are recharged each year with revenues that come in specifically for street and transit types of expenditures. The downtown parking equipment, again, this is separate and apart from the modernization that modern parking executed in the current year. By way of sewer fund, again, this represents about 1/3 of the total sewer program of about $30 million. So about 2/3 of the $30 million is M&O personnel, and then 1/3 is capital. That all is in existence. And then you see refuse disposal. Again, overwhelmingly, about 92% of that project, of that program, is the actual operation. A very small amount this current year is in the form of either capital or CIP. Then certainly GWP, to the extent that we have funds remaining and we're knocking down the projects that the GWP electric and water bonds we had sold those bonds, both sides of GWP. We're knocking off those projects. You see all the investment that will be coming forward by way of Mr. Zern's operation in electric, and then again on water. This is still electric, on water. And it is basically everything that we need to do that focuses on making sure that our storage, which we have done a great deal of work on water storage. Now you see this current bond that we are drawing down on focused on water distribution. So to the extent that you have done tours of the electric operation, soon you'll be doing tours of the water operation to give you a very strong degree of comfort with the amount of work that's being done by GWP. Then water depreciation, and ISD is the final fund that we have. This is all of our information systems infrastructure. So this is part of that ISF, Internal Service Fund charge that goes to all the departments for all of the work that they want done by way of their technology needs in all the other line departments. Again, kind of closing out, summing up, you see in the general fund portion, the 401 portion, $6.7 million in CIP, certainly robust, more so than it's been in the past. And then all of our other funds punctuated by community services and parks, $16 million for parks and open space, a great deal of investment in public works and water and power. Grand total for all of our capital investments, almost $64 million in the coming fiscal year. Let us work through the fee schedule that you have. All the council members, certainly we've been able to produce, it's not just a prop. I can testify to the fact that council members have read through their citywide fee schedule, which is color-coded and goes into the wide variety of fees that we have for service. In terms of and what is a fee and what is not a fee, the silver lining of doing public work in California is you know very clearly what is a tax and what is not a tax. First by Prop 13, then Prop 218, and then more recently by Prop 26. In essence, everything is a tax unless it falls into one of 7 categories, and I would submit to you that all of the 2,400 plus fees that are in our fee structure meet the one of the 7, if not more than just one of the 7 exceptions in Prop 26. So when folks say, well, don't I pay taxes for that? Those taxes don't cover these fees, because user fees are those charges that accrue to an individual or group for a private benefit. And those would not be taxes. Those are discretionary activities requested by the payer. That said, the City Council, as a matter of setting policy, has the ability to decide how much of that charge for that discretionary service is levied upon that user. So some things that you wish to sanction and support, you may have a public subsidy of, and those things that you do not wish to sanction or support, or that you feel are so entirely private benefits, commercial activities, that you do not wish to support any of it. And what you see here in this chart is that graphic representation of what is a fee versus what is a tax. So in things that are entirely user fee driven, could be building permits, or it could be contract classes. Somebody is going to build an office building. You're going to charge them perhaps the full freight that you can recover to provide the level of service for building inspection, for plan check, for all of those things. On the opposite end of the scale, those things that are covered entirely by taxes would be the types of services that are expressly part of the government's proposition for public service, like police patrols or fire patrols. And then somewhere in the middle are those things that you have, as I say, a great degree of flexibility, where there's some public benefit or perhaps where there's marginally more private benefit. Youth programs, great example, those things that you want to encourage the youth to get out, give them something constructive to do, and so you may subsidize to some great degree the cost of day camps, and we do that, and that's why we have 2,000 kids early on in the season signing up for day camp. It's a great value, and it's something that we want to see kids being active, being healthy, and coming together and enjoying one another during their summer break. And then you have something like historic preservation, where there is some very significant private benefit, but there's also some public benefit, because the council places an emphasis on preserving the historic legacy and richness of Glendale. So we take all of that assessment as to what is public, what is private, and what is that which is in between, and ascribe that to what our total cost is, the amount that we can recover under Prop 218, Prop 26, the cost of the service that we reasonably can recover. So we take the fully burdened rate, the time it takes to provide that level of service, as well as all of the overhead that goes into providing that degree of service. Let's see here. And then, as I mentioned, 2,400 fees for service, 2421. To a great degree, 1,674 of those fees will not be changed. 77 will be deleted. 72 because we changed a business practice, or because we don't spend the same amount of time, or we've figured a way to provide a level of service that is less time intensive. We've been able to decrease fees. There will be 243 fees, not presented all right here, but they're all in your booklet. And before our hearing on the 24th, certainly we would like to hear from the council and the community about what you think of those increased fees. But it's important to note, those are fees where we do not recover the full cost, but council has told us in previous sessions, move forward with recovering an increased amount of the cost of providing that service. And that is different and apart from the 302 CPI increases to existing fees. Those are fees where perhaps we are collecting the full cost today, and we're applying the consumer price index just to keep pace with what our cost is. And then at the end, there are 53 new fees. So again, I'm not going to go through all 2,400 fees or even all 302 or 243, but what we want to give you here, because again, the point of today is to amplify or to highlight what is contained in the fee study, to give you a sampling of the different categories, and then certainly take all of your comments, take all of your suggestions, and reflect that in the budget hearing on the 24th. So fees that are being deleted, the technology surcharge. We had applied a surcharge to all of our permits through CDD to the tune of 18.38%. We've been able to include into the fees, weave into the fees themselves an element, the ISD cost to maintain the technology infrastructure of the department, and thus delete the technology surcharge. Other things that we're seeing, records fees, cassette reproduction fees, things that we just don't do anymore, we eliminate those fees as time goes on. In terms of increases to existing fees, what I will do is take you through, but again, just a very quick sampling, and as this is more for the public because the council's gone through this in your individual briefings, take you through how to read the fee schedule. On the left-hand side, you see what the level of review was done. So we had done a cost study. We know what our cost is. We know what the time it takes to provide a service. In some cases, it may be market-driven, but in this particular case for public works engineering fees, it's a cost study. We have the page upon which the fee exists and the number of the fee. So they're all numbered. They're all color-coded. You have the description of the fee or the fee title, you have the full cost, you have the current fee, and you have what is proposed. So again, when you look at recovery, construction, the encroachment permit costs us $1,733 to process. Previously, we were collecting roughly half of that amount. When we brought you the full cost as part of the previous cost study, the council said that is too great a jump to do all at once. Break it into a couple of years. And so the current fee today is $1,452. We're recommending to take on to recover the full cost of $1,733 in the coming fiscal year. Again, something that is entirely private benefit that that speaks to the need or the request to do a full cost recovery as opposed to some other fees that you'll see in just a second. Same thing with right-of-way improvements or street use permits. So again, you can see where the fee exists, what page it's on, what it is, what the full cost is, and what the recovery is. When we look at other public works fees in terms of parking, here is not cost study, but market research. We are asking that the maximum daily rate at our parking garages go from $6 to $9. You'll see that in tandem with increases to surface rates and on-street parking. Right now, our on-street parking demand is in excess, the occupancy of on-street parking spaces is well in excess of 90, I believe 96%. What we want to achieve on the on-street parking is to have greater turnover and encourage, by way of the market, encourage shoppers, diners, theater goers to park in the parking structures. And so we have an increase from $1 to $1.50. And then for off-brand, you're looking at 75 cents to $1. This is still allowing for the 90 minutes of free parking. But you're seeing through your ability to set policy that we are endeavoring to encourage people, if you're going to be here for a long period of time, park in the parking structure or at least the surface parking lots, not on the street. In terms of library, again, market research, we will look at surrounding libraries, surrounding communities, community centers, and we try to find what the sweet spot, if you will, is for the lease rates for, in this case, the Civic Center auditorium. We'll have a nice new Civic Center. It'll have a nice new kitchenette. Right now, we're charging $220. The proposed fee is $100 per hour for a minimum of 30 hours. So I'm sorry?
3 hours.
What did I say?
30.
30, I'm sorry, for 3 hours. And it gives you an idea of how some of these fees work together. And keep in mind, too, we still will be offering very significant discounts for nonprofit organizations. And then when you look to community development building, there is a slew of fees, perhaps along with Public Works, the largest chunk of our fees go towards the community development department. But here again, you look at, what's a good one? Special fees for single-family properties, replacement of windows. Window replacement is a big deal. The full cost to process that fee, that permit, is $603.93 by way of the cost study. The current fee is $143 plus $25 per window. We are recommending you go to $150 plus $25 per window. The point being that that's going to be, generally speaking, on a typical single-family house, going to be less than the cost, the fully burdened cost of $603.93. Why? Because we want to encourage folks as much as we can to get to the inspection for the replacement of their windows, and so it's high quality, it meets with the code. You'll see it there again with the electric permit fees for inspections and other projects that are going on for your single-family homeowner, not to be confused with merchant builders, commercial developers. The council has been pretty clear in years past about recovering the fully burdened cost, even if over a period of years, to march towards the fully burdened cost from those folks that are for-profit builders as opposed to your single-family residents. One item that continues to come up from time to time is the middle there. You see fee number 56. Page 66 is the historic preservation process. The Mills Act request, it costs us about almost $76.81 for the fully burdened cost, because the council in years past has requested, has directed that we support and encourage this activity. The fee has been $1,250, a fraction of what the $76.81 fully burdened cost is. We're recommending in the coming year to go to $1,300. Still well less than what the cost to provide the level of service is.
Councilmember Najarian.
I'd like to raise that to put it more in line with our cost. I don't know if that discussion is for this time, but it's budget time, and that's when you said we should do it.
Yep,
I think it's a extensive amount of staff time in a department where we're extensively challenged in going through plans and other issues. And in return, the homeowner, who almost always gets an approval on the Mills Act request, is conferred a substantial benefit by the discount, if not total elimination, of property tax. I don't know if anyone else is there with me, but that's just the way I feel.
So we're noting all feedback from council, both in this session and as you send me your individual perspective on things. So at the very least, that will be part of the hearing on the 24th, but it's a point of discussion for the council if you want to discuss it now, or if you just want us to bring it up at the hearing on the 24th.
Got the hearing.
I think it would be, for the, the time constraints that we're under right
We
now.
are 7 minutes away from turning back into a pumpkin. So, again, CDD planning, again, you get the idea. Administrative exception for single-family projects, fully burdened cost is $1,283. We're proposing $780. For the rack master who may be out somewhere, we are keeping the news rack fees the same. However, the abatement, if we have to go and abate a situation that has not been remedied by themselves, by the news rack folks, we are proposing to charge the fully burdened cost of $188.
That's fair.
Smoking permitted areas, we're going from, this again is something that the council said phase it in, so we are at $209. We're going to the fully burdened cost as our recommendation of $450. In terms of animal licensing, this gets a lot of discussion every year. We are looking there at the unaltered animal, the animal that has not been fixed. We are at $33. We're proposing to go to $45. The fully burdened cost is $61.69.
I think this will probably be another one that we'll want to take a look at.
Okay, so
Assuming that doesn't include young puppies, or does it?
Pardon?
I don't know. I would have to defer to the folks in the police department. And when we talk about senior unaltered, we're not talking about the age of the dog. We're talking about the senior citizen. So I do know that.
Altered seniors.
We have kennel permits, something that is also an item that gets a lot of attention, and not just in my household. But the fully burdened cost is $190. That's what we're recommending going to, but based on council feedback, we will take a look at that as well and provide you with options if you want to do something less than the fully burdened cost. Alarm permits, again, council has decided that we want to keep these low to encourage folks to have a good functioning alarm system and to make sure that we aren't getting false alarms, so you incentivize those people that do not have false alarms and penalize those who are perhaps careless or have a faulty system that does create false alarms. And so you see that reflected in the alarm permit fees. This is these are fire sprinkler, fire alarms, similar type of scenario. When you look at the folks over in the fire department, the annual inspections that aren't covered by the company inspection program, we are still trying to incorporate, try to incentivize people to work with us and work with fire inspections, and so we aren't recommending necessarily the fully burdened cost, and so you'll see us continue to march towards the full cost recovery as time goes on. And then GWP, again, those areas where it accrues to the single-family homeowner, we try to show as much relief as possible. To the merchant builder, we will basically ascribe the fully burdened cost within the bounds of what the council will allow, depending on how much of an increase in any given year it represents. We talked about CPI adjustments. As you recall, last year we didn't do a CPI adjustment because CPI was so low, and so we just lumped last year into this year, so we're rolling up over 2 years, so it's 3.1% on those fees that we would charge otherwise based on market, or that we already are getting full cost recovery. It would just be keeping up with what the market is today. Just a couple of new fees. The one that is most notable is the citywide credit card service fee recovery. Right now, we are losing money a lot of times when folks are paying by way of credit card. So we are looking for your permission to add a convenience fee of 2.5%, and we would apply that citywide. I know council members have had some discussion about whether or not is there a way to layer that in, so smaller purchases versus larger purchases, because you can imagine if somebody is paying for their a plan submittal of $10,000 or $20,000, that starts to add up in terms of what the city is paying for them to process by way of convenience. With a credit card, we'll look at that to see if we can differentiate between small purchases for a resident who's just paying their GWP bill versus a developer who's paying for a plan submittal. And we will have that.
You gave us an example that was absolutely extraordinary. Do you recall what that was, the charge that someone wanted to put on the
Armin, let me look at you.
$40,000?
Yeah, oh, yes.
Somebody came in and wanted to put,
Wanted
we
to
wanted
put
to charge them.
$40,000 on the credit card, and the city would end up paying $4,000 in fees for that
We would,
charge.
we end
That's-
up losing money on that proposition.
I don't, yeah.
4,000 in fees and a 40,000?
No, it would be
1,400.
1,400. Yeah, it wouldn't be the full four. That's 10,000. Yeah, right.
So we are paying the merchant services fees.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not charging
Absence
people.
of that.
Correct, yeah.
That's about $550,000 a year.
$500,000 a year we pay in those.
2.5. Last but not least, the density bonus review, this is something that has come up. Council had a question. We are effectively processing through housing and legal density bonuses under the state law and not recouping costs. Thus, a private developer is experiencing a significant windfall by way of what they're able to develop on site. Again, keeping in council's priority of merchant builders and developers paying the fully burdened cost, we would ask you to impose that $8,811 fee. It is very significant, but I think you get the idea as to what it is that we're looking to achieve, rather than have the city subsidizing that private activity. So again, 2,400, 21 fees, no changes to the vast majority of them. Those that are seeing an increase, 302 of them are CPI. The rest are, again, march towards cost recovery to the limits allowed by the city council, understanding that residents and single-family homeowners, we're trying to alleviate burdens to the legal limits that are allowed, and on those activities that you choose not to sponsor and not subsidize, to charge the fully burdened cost. With that, I think we're done.
Take a breath.
I missed a couple of minutes of this presentation, but I want to make sure that the fee that we're charging for Mills Act applications,
Yeah.
I find that to be woefully inadequate, and I would support a drastic increase of that fee.
So we will bring you back on the 24th a range of levels from the current to the proposed to the 25th, 50th, 75th percentile, and the council again gets to make its policy.
Okay.
Page 67, item 76, the subdivision, the condo conversion fees. We have out of $11,550, we are basically recovering $10,500 of it. I think, I think the people will do it one way or the other, but in the hopes of providing more affordable entry-level units for people to purchase, I think we need to look into that fee to give a little bit incentive for property owners to convert their apartments into condos, so people who live in those apartments, they can purchase them in a more reasonable price than the brand new.
And that would be with the assumption that they were going to be used for affordable housing?
Not affordable
Not
housing.
necessarily is what.
Or
It's not affordable. It's not
low-income housing?
No, it's
I
not
thought
affordable
that's what you
housing.
said. I'm
This
sorry.
would just be the conversion of an existing apartment building,
Into condominium.
and Mr. Garpetian has expressed that desire in the past, so we will show you a scaled, apparently a decrease from what this is here, and the council can decide, do you want to or not want to?
And also the rules and regulations, the ordinance that we have for the condo conversion, I think that has to come back for the council to.
That will be part of South Glendale plan this summer.
Thank you.
With that, ma'am, I'm done.
Okay, very good job.
Thank you.
Without hardly taking a breath.
Wow.
I was,
I'm tired watching.
right, I know, we all are. I have a few cards. Before I call the speakers, I would like to make one announcement now, and I will repeat, but due to an issue with the elevator in this building, the city council meeting for tonight, this evening at 6 p.m. will be held in MSB room 105. Again, 6 o'clock tonight, MSB room 105 for the city council meeting. Okay, so let's proceed then with the cards. Bill Weissman, followed by Sharon Weissman.
Good afternoon, Mayor Devine, City Council members, city staff, and the public. My name is Bill Weissman from far north Glendale. The topic I did want to discuss in regard to your budget study today, which you've already had some ample discussion on, has to do with the funding for completing the barn at Dugmagian Wilderness Park. And I heard Councilmember Garpetian say that there apparently was some misconception going on regarding people like us who are supporting the funding to complete the park. I don't think there's any misconception going on here. The last time the funding for completion of the barn was agendized in a city council meeting, there was an asterisk in your staff report next to the amount of money that would be required for the funding. And down at the bottom of the page, that asterisk said, well, of course, the city council has the option to deappropriate this money. So that's been put out there as a possibility. I don't think there's any misconception that the funding is being threatened. Plus, we have had council members behind the dais express the opinion that that money should be used elsewhere and not for completing the barn at Duke-Magian. So I surely hope that you're right, Councilmember Garpetian, and I hope that the funding for the rehab and eventual completion of the barn does go through. And we're here to urge you to do that. And the packet that you received recently with the petitions that some of the other speakers are going to talk about, I think goes to debunk a myth. And that myth is that hardly anyone uses Duke-Magian Park. Duke-Magian Park is very heavily used. It's very heavily used not only by our own local community, but by people who come from areas far and wide. And I urge you to please retain funding to complete the barn.
Thank you. Sharon Weissman, followed by Sherry Stubbs.
Thank you, Mayor Devine, council members and staff, and everyone listening. I'm Sharon Weissman from Far North Glendale, and I'm here too to urge you to complete the funding for the Le Ménager barn, and I want to explain a little bit why. We were coming home from the days of the Verdugo Heritage Association annual dinner at the Catalina Verdugo Adobe on September 27th last year, and that happened to be the day of the lunar eclipse known as the blood moon. And just on impulse, we decided to drive up to Duke-Magian to see if we could catch a glimpse of it. And when we got up there, the parking lots were all full. And fortunately, somebody was just leaving, so we got a space. The developed part of the park, the lower part, was completely crowded. Despite there being no formal program, there are sometimes astronomy programs up there. Families had telescopes set up, people were taking photos, kids were excitedly learning about science, and everyone was having a really great time. Future astronomical events could be enhanced with a facility for related exhibits and programs. Last month, the National Park Service issued the 2015 National Park Visitor Spending Effects Report documenting the economic contribution. It shows that in 2015, the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area generated $34 million in visitor spending, plus creating 486 jobs, resulting in $18.3 million in labor income. That's a good indication that completion of the barn at Duke-Magian would have a positive effect on the local economy, albeit much smaller. Families are likely to patronize businesses before and after visiting amenities in the park. We know that also income, if there were weddings, would be direct income. We know from being docents at the other Adobe, the Casa Adobe de San Rafael, that people who were married in that park years ago come back, and they are the most generous contributors to our docent fund. Finishing the grounds and finishing the barn and the project would not only benefit the children and nature lovers of Glendale and the surrounding region, but be an economic boost also. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Thank you. Sherry Stubbs, followed by Joe and Karen Golderin. I think that's Golderson? Golderin?
Sherry Stubbs, Far North Glendale. We have presented you, each of you, with a notebook containing our argument, and that argument is supported by 346 petitions, pictures of the diverse use of the park over the years, and the numerous zip codes evidencing the wide geographical area of residents signing the petitions. We hope we have included all the points necessary for your consideration on this issue. I have in hand another 96 signatures obtained in only 3.5 hours this past Saturday morning. So now we have about a total of 450 signatures obtained in less than 3 weeks. We are pleased to see that the $500,000 additional needed is reflected in your slide 24 of the Capital Improvement Program 401 category. That is very encouraging. So we urgently request again that the City Council retain and reappropriate, I think that's the word Mr. Ochoa used, the currently existing funding, appropriate the additional $500,000 needed, and proceed to complete the Deukmejian Wilderness Park for the use and benefit of its residents. Thank you.
Stubbs.
And I will be babysitting this Friday night, so my family can go on the Twilight hike. Thanks.
Joe and Karen Calderon.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Galderon, my wife Karen. We own a bar. It's called the Blue Moon Lounge at 3509 North Verdugo Road. I retired a few years ago, and that's kind of my pastime, and she still has a full-time job.
I didn't retire.
Yeah, anyway, she's my bookkeeper. Anyway, long story short, we'll get to the point. When I saw the new fees on the budget in regard to the pool table and the amusement machines, and although it's not a big thing to a lot of people, I have noticed that over the past few years, the amusement machines have gone up like 171%. The pool table has gone up about 126%. And most of my concern, that in of itself is a concern, but also where is this going in the future? I know I saw the thing up on the screen where it said the full cost for the billiard bullroom is $778. I'm not sure where that actually...
We understand burden cost. We understand this. We have one pool table, and we're charged for a billiard room. A lot of people have a great deal of billiard tables that they earn revenue on. We have one 15-year-old billiard table. We don't think we should have to pay as much as everybody else. It should be tiered, we feel.
Yeah, and we have one shuffleboard machine and two electronic dart machines. And like I said, it doesn't... Although it's not much, it's small business nowadays, it doesn't take much to tip the scale with these costs that are involved, and you may or may not have seen up on Honolulu, businesses come and go, and we'd like to keep the business going, and thank you for your consideration in regard to looking at those fees.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah. Sure.
So do you pay a fee then for having the bar? Some kind of, you pay an alcohol license fee and
yeah, ABC, there's an ABC license fee, that's to the ABC.
You have a CUP that you pay?
ABC.
So they're basically being kind of double dip, because if they're having to pay for that plus for being a pool room, even though they only have one pool table, it seems like the pool room fee was set up for a place that's just a pool room, and then you have a bar fee for a place that's just a bar. Why would they have to pay both?
That was our thought.
I agree with them. I think that seems
$600.
And a couple of years ago, it was $261.
And having one pool table,
now
I
it's
think in a
$600.
bar is not a billiard room.
It's on page...
Someone who knows what a billiard room looks like.
74. It's on page 74, and I believe it's number 19, arcade billiard establishments.
So maybe that's something that when they're, I don't know whether it's today or another time, I would
Right, we
love for
can
us to have
take a look at
a
that.
fee for someone who's a bar, or a fee for someone who's an arcade, or a fee for someone who's a billiard room, unless you really can justify why you'd want to have separate fees for all of those.
Well, I can tell you that the reason why you would have a separate fee is because the activity, you'd have to claim it's purely and strictly incidental. And so having a bar is the same as having a billiard table in that bar.
Having a bar with one billiard table, to me, is the same as having a bar.
But my point is that is where the council, again, gets to make policy, because right here, this fee doesn't differentiate between Charles Billiards, that has a whole bunch of billiard tables, or an establishment that has one.
Okay, well, I think that there should be a threshold.
But that is for council to decide.
We can discuss.
That's a slippery slope, because then you can get into the whole game of someone can have a billiard place, but then also have a bar, but then they can claim that they're a billiard hall, but not a bar. I mean, so a bar is a bar, a billiard hall is a billiard hall. It's a different matter that having just one table probably warrants a fee for one table, but I guess we got rid of the per table fees because we thought we were making things easier. I think this case proves that we didn't make things easier. Maybe we should have a threshold for one table. It really is not a billiard hall.
Oh,
Yeah. So we can accommodate our, especially small businesses, we got to look out for them.
We appreciate your time.
We'll have to look and see if we can have a separate fee for caroms as well.
We'll get those.
There is no backgammon there, we promise.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And those are all the cards I have.
So my other question is, in terms of Tukmagian, I think, I think that what's concerning to people is this idea that this money is earmarked, but it can be unearmarked. Is there a way to just earmark it so that there's some certainty for us to say, this is our intention, is to finish the barn project? Because I would agree, I think we should finish the barn and get it done, and we should allocate the money that we need to do that and give the community some certainty that the project's going to be finished, and give them a timetable so they know when it's going to be finished, and kind of take it off the table.
I guess a couple things. The idea, we would never as staff presuppose the council's authority in the council's mind. So that's entirely for you all to decide. You have appropriated that money, as I think Mrs. Stubbs was describing. That appropriation exists. It's sitting there until and unless you tell us to do something else. It's going to stay there. We're asking to augment that by another $500,000 to finish off the original intention. But again, as staff, our job is to provide you with options based on what you tell us. So it is entirely in your call. I would never try to, until you actually approve a project, a contractual obligation, I would not try to tie your hands, because other councils may come along and say, no, we want to do something different.
So what's the timetable then for entering into those contractual agreements and finishing the work that needs to be done?
As I say,
Is it a question of us just deciding to move ahead, or are we waiting for something else to be finished so that we can do the work in a way that needs to be physically done?
No, I think right now it's just a function of having project management staff and Public Works continue on the track that they're on. They'll knock off the building systems that Mr. Garpetian was describing, and then when that part of the project is done, we'll come back to you with the next phase, which would be the subsequent phases, the restroom and a nature facility, I believe it is. And at that point, you would allow us to issue an RFP or not issue an RFP, or you would say, no, deobligate those funds and go do something else with them. But right now, that's where that money resides. You have $1.5 million sitting there waiting to be used, and until you tie it to a project, a contractual obligation, you have latitude on what to do with it. You get to make that policy.
And so you're, just to be clear to myself, so you're telling us that we shouldn't tie it to that contractual obligation because it's not ready yet?
There is no contractual obligation to tie it to at this point.
So that would take issuing an RFP and so why don't we do that now? Is it just that we
just don't have that those bodies right now in terms of the capacity, the pipeline, if you will, for our project management staff hasn't gotten there yet. They will get there soon. And hopefully before they ever get there, council will say, yeah, we want to move forward with that project, or not. We want to go a different direction. Several months. We were talking about 5-6 months.
So it would be my impression then that what we will do eventually is approve the budget, and then when it comes back to us, the Tukmagian project, that would be when we would make the decision on the $500,000, correct? Am I right?
You would make the decision on the $500,000 effective June 14th with this budget.
Whether we approve the budget or not.
So if you were inclined to not do anything beyond the HVAC system that is the contract that is currently let, my expectation would be that you would not approve this $500,000 and then take the next step of deobligating 1.5. I think council has had robust debate about that, but you haven't made up your mind as to what you're going to do. And to that end, I get it. You want to weigh all your options and evaluate each one. But the time will come, sometime in the next several months, where you're going to have to decide where you're going to follow through with that original vision, or do you going to pivot and go a different direction? And I think what you're hearing from folks is, we want to know what you're going to do. And I would reiterate, I would never tell you what to do. I would tell you, here are your options.
Madam Mayor.
Okay, Mr. Garpetian.
But I just want to make a clarification so public will understand what I was talking about as well. Even the petitions that we received, it indicated appropriate the necessary funds to finish the floors, the window, the HVAC, which we already have done. That's what I was talking about, that there's a misconception out there that these funds are not there and we're taking those funds away, which is not true. We already allocated all those funds. It's obligated and the contracts are going out. But the rest of the part 4, if you will, I'd like to know what it is. First of all, I don't know what it is. Nobody has explained that to me. It just says Nature Center and $2 million for a Nature Center when, I don't know, Rock Haven is rotting there. That's what I had a problem with overall. So when I'm not against finishing the barn is being completed. But overall, this is like a money pit. But all the necessary funds that we calculated a few years ago, it's allocated. It's sitting in an account. But what we need now is another $500,000. I don't know, in 2 years, we may ask for another $500,000 because our calculation was changed or our ideas changed. So what I want to do is complete the barn so we can open the doors. We're debating over something that it's going to come in the future. Let's finish the barn, open the doors, use it, and see what is it that we need. I mean, we don't even know what we need. It's a program. The bathroom, I understand. There's a handicap accessible bathroom that we have to build. But the rest of it, when the time comes, we'll decide what to do with it. But right now we have so many projects that it's not being completed because we appropriated funds in different accounts and it's sitting there, and it's not the right thing to do. And I think I want to finish, my thing is to finish the barn and see what we can do with that $1.5 million. And when the time comes for the 4th phase or fourth part of this project, find out how much funds do we need at that time and allocate it at that time. Why you want to park money in an account for years to come when we need that money for something else? It has nothing to do with South Glendale and North Glendale. There's this big battle going on, and I don't want to be part of that. But we can use that fund, hey, put it in Rock Haven and finish Rock Haven, $2-3 million. You can finish it. But that's not the right thing to let that property sit there for years and deteriorate and park that money in an account that we don't need it right now. So that's my 2 cents on this issue. I want to finish the barn, open it up so public can use and see what are our needs from there on.
And this is a discussion for a later date?
Well, I think probably we need to be able to give you, and seeing as time is going to run out, Jess is going to put together a report for you that will outline the different phases. So you can see what the final phase would be, and we do feel comfortable, confident in the budget number. But again, it's will the council, do you want to walk down that road? That's what it comes down to. But we will provide a memo to you that outlines the project scope.
And for the future council discussion, please bring the entire budget, what we spent on Dukmechian, what was the vision, and what is that 4th part of this completion of this barn. So we can make a decision. But I like the public to know that it's not just this $2 million. We spent a lot more money on that project.
Yes, Mayor Devine and council members, if I may, very quickly, I just want to be real clear that the completion of the mechanical systems, the project that is underway right now, the $900,000 that's currently tied up and obligated, that will allow us to use the barn for special events, but it will not be open to the public. It will only be available for special events. The part that will be open to the public will be the completion of the Nature Center, which would include the new restrooms. The next step is for us to prepare, what the project management team is to prepare an RFP. The RFP will detail what the idea is in terms of exactly what's going to go in the Nature Center, what it consists of, what it is comprised of, and maybe some models of other nature centers so we can get a good idea. And the budget will dictate how state-of-the-art that nature center will end up, or will it end up to be more minimal and rustic. It depends on the budget if the council still wants to approve that project. So when we come back with that report to authorize us to issue the RFP, we'll have a lot more detail, and we'll include a full history of funding of the entire Dukmejian project from 20 years ago.
So the only reason that this won't be open to public is the bathroom?
It will not be a completed public facility. It won't have it won't have finished electrical work. It won't have finished plumbing. It won't have any displays or fixtures or furnishings. It'll just be like a large meeting room, only for special events. And yeah, the restroom building is a big
There
part of
is
it.
no electrical or plumbing in there for special events.
It'll be very minimal.
Similar to what we were doing at the work boot tour. Council didn't seem to mind that we were in a room that was still a barn, actually, and being able to enjoy the property that way. It would be rather Spartan. It's just how much investment do you want to put in? At the end of the day, that's what this whole discussion comes back to.
Can we decide this in June when we finish the budget, or? Sorry, this is just so just.
If you, no, well, again, you have, there was an original appropriation of $2.5 million.
Right.
You've expended $1 million of that so far, as Mr. Duran indicates, leaving you with about $1.5 million appropriated to Duke Majan.
So when do we get to decide what we want to do?
So
in the
you have
fall?
$1.5 million to Duke Majan. If you want to complete that vision as was described by Mr. Duran, we would ask for another $500,000 to bring that next phase to $2 million.
Okay.
And that will come to you in the way of an RFP, unless directed otherwise, in the next several months.
Okay.
Okay, so let me say a few words about that. I saw the signatures, the petition that was signed by hundreds of residents. I think Ms. Stubbs said it was 450 signatures. And the one thing that would help me sort of find the balance, or the moral balance on this issue, in deciding to take away $2 million from those who reside in downtown or South Glendale, the area where the development is happening, where the impact is happening, and taking those fees and giving them to North Glendale, or not North Glendale specifically, the La Crescenta area, to Duke Majan Park, would be to have more signatures, or some signatures at least, from that part that's impacted. Because I saw the petition, it was a lot of La Crescenta people, probably 20-25% La Cañada, Pasadena, Sunland, Tahunga, but I didn't notice petitions from school children in South Glendale, the ones that are supposedly going to benefit from this. So if those signatures could be collected and presented to us, I think that would be very helpful. That's it. That's all I had.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments? Next item, Mr. Kasakian.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. We are adjourned.
We need to set up for a party.
I didn't look at it.
Can you get the name, please?